Alrighty. Hello there. This ought to be satisfactory. Welcome to the Monday live stream, as always. I got a number of different things going on, although I don't have anybody in the chat just yet, but soon I will. Probably soon I will. Soon enough, anywho. I'm going to shuffle some of my windows and things so that I can see if anybody does show up. Oh, 3 people already. Cool beans. And it is a interesting day on a number of fronts. And I ain't even talking about current events. We're probably not going to talk about that very much. I have registered a domain for a new upcoming project. And I have set up a thing that is capable of playing audio. There it is. It's still on. So that when we do programming, you can hear a little better rather than listening to strictly off of the surface of the laptop. And we'll see how that works out. Because one of the problems I was having with Bassamp was that the stuff I had set up was working okay. But then when I had it in the main system and could hear everything going on with the bass and all, that stuff was broken. So I'm going to need to fix that. And that's one thing I might do some of today. Hey, Bo. And I will see whether maybe I can't here's something that I can do. Let me switch over to that for long enough to pause the screen here, and then it'll be less distracting for me looking at. Whoop. You are listening to my Dragons album, which is actually part of the thing I was talking about. And it's not going to sound that spectacular necessarily, because you're listening to it over this little... It's a thing called an Altec in-motion portable speaker dealie. They are tiny speakers, but they're kind of bass boosted. But you should be able to hear what goes on with, like, if I was to go to a audio unit, for instance, what would be good? The bi-quad triple VST. So now doing this, you can kind of hear what I'm doing. And if I switch over to here, so that's not real bass, and it is also not a good sound, but you can hear more than you did over the laptop. Because when I was demonstrating this stuff like this, you were hearing that, not especially helpful. The little laptop speaker's not good. But these a little better. An interesting side note there is this little speaker thing is using the same technology that I use in my studio mains, because it's this tiny little thing that runs on batteries, except for I do have a wall wart plugged into it, so it's not going to stop running on me. And it's powered off of Class D amplification, much like my studio main amplifiers. So there's some useful things about that. It might be a garbage little portable speaker, but it's using those Class D chips to amplify stuff, so it does have a kind of nice, smooth, you could even say tube-like sound. Hey, Lorenzo. And this is what we got for today. Since I still don't have a setup where I can patch stuff into the stream DI and then still be monitoring it myself. I mean, I could try to set up something and then have headphones in my ears the entire time, but that's for another day. For today, I've got this. And today I've also got, let's see, news on this front. Here's a box of stuff that I got that inside that box is these. This was the second box, much like it. And this is some of that hardware stuff that I've been talking about. I've actually seen fit to get a whole bunch more of these because I found these are surplus discontinued Panasonic trim potentiometers that they don't make anymore, and they discontinued, and they're no longer a thing. But that's why I was able to get some of these for very cheaply. How cheaply, you might ask? I'll be able to sell 18 of them for $1, if I remember correctly. Like, if that was my number, yep, I think so. That means that if I do my hardware synth thing and get people building stuff, and I'll be building stuff myself on stream, not only do I have enough for myself, but I also have enough so that people who don't necessarily have lots of money to throw at synthesizers can be like, okay, $1 worth of perf board, which I could show you how much that is too. I worked it out. This is the size of perf board that fits on those picture frames I'm setting up. And this is exactly $1 worth of that. This is a big enough piece to build something on. And I'm divvying it up into pieces that are ready to send out at $1 each. And I'm designing everything around that because it's fun for me. It's like, you wouldn't believe how many of these you could get for $1 because I got them kind of surplus, and it's all about knowing how to do that. The trick is, when you're doing that, you wind up basically, you know, you can get the things for 18 or how much is this one? Let's see. These ones will end up being 16 for $1. This is what you'd use for your power supply isolation. And on the one hand, that means that if you're doing that, you can set somebody up with the parts that they will need for like a 16 voice oscillator drone to DIY build for themselves for like less than $5 all told. That's very exciting. Unfortunately, in order to get into the position of being able to do that, you're spending thousands of dollars to get the stuff in quantities that you're getting those low prices. And so that's what this whole DIY project is about, that I'm talking about before I get into the actual coding side of things. And I've been continuing to charge ahead in that. Let me see. Here's my notes. Those LEDs that I got where you could have blinky lights on the synthesizers that you build at 50 for $1. I'm getting more of those too, because it's exciting to me to be able to do that. I'm getting more of the red LEDs that are more along the lines of 14 for $1, and more of the inductors that help you make really good sounding analog EQs of some very specific kinds at 10 for $1. That was such a good setup that I went and got even more of those ones, and they'll be in boxes in my basement quite a bit, but Those are the inductors where you can use them as part of a simple capacitor inductor circuit to do a really good low pass for things like bass stuff. Exactly. I am actively working to get this stuff together where I can set people up. Probably I'm thinking in terms of patrons, but I'm not sure. Like, I noticed that the synthesizer musician that I follow, Colin Benders, is doing a record release. And he is giving his vinyl records away for free, and you pay for shipping. He's also got some stuff going on where you can get special fancy editions of it with extra artwork or with a sock puppet that he made himself by paying a lot more money. And I think that's working out so well for him that it's kind of defining the concept. So I might end up along those lines of doing this DIY stuff and not even requiring that people are patrons or whatever, and coming up with something where it's like, I'll do this, and then I'll also throw in something else that's not strictly necessary for some greatly larger bonus amount. That way people can get into doing this kind of stuff, but then people who actually have resources can show their enthusiasm, kind of like they're doing with Colin's record. But yeah, I'm pursuing, just this morning, I was all after a bunch of that stuff, and I got more of those trim potentiometers. I got, and I was going to DigiKey instead of Master this time, but I'll be publishing everything as far as where I got it all, for the purposes of people who don't need to get stuff $1 at a time. If you can throw $39 towards chips, you can get 100 chips at a time, and then you've got them for any amount of projects you could possibly want. And that's what I'm doing. I'm getting a set each of 4007 CMOS. That's the product number, not the number that I'm getting. I'm getting 100 of them. And 4007s are sets of very simple transistors that you can use as like a digital switch, where signal goes to one direction and then you put a voltage somewhere else and it goes. It's like a relay, but it's a relay for about 39 cents, and it switches much faster than an analog relay would do. I'm getting 4046 phase lock loops, and I'm going to be doing coding today. Believe me, this is like barely 10 minutes in, so I'm just filling you in on what else I was doing this morning. But I'm absolutely doing coding today. The 4046 is a phase locked loop. What that means is it's like a little oscillator that will follow the input of something else. And I'm thinking about trying to make a plugin to that effect as well. But what you can do with that is, well, there is a Eurorack module by Nonlinear Circuits called the Giant Bono that I super would like to get one. I probably will at some point. But what it's made out of is this 39-cent chip and about I think $3 chip. I think it's $3 unless it's just $1, which is a sort of echo unit all on one chip. I couldn't tell you the exact model number of it, but I have like 40 of them. And you can also get that stuff on Amazon fairly easily. That's where I'm getting them because they're not being sold through DigiKey or Mouser directly. And if you combine this delay with the phase lock loop, you can get into some really crazy effects. So I got some of these phase lock loops, thinking maybe I can do something interesting with that. And then I also got a 4051 and 4052 chips. And those are another kind of switch deal, except for that it's patching, like the one is patching one input to 8 different positions on the output. And those are specified by a 3-bit digital word on 3 other inputs. So basically, you encode the input, and oh yeah, you definitely keep the soldering tools if you can. I'll be setting you up with the ability to have some, because this is where all this is going, is being able to set people up with the ability to do stuff. Get rid of the soldering tools last. The 4051 and 4052 are these switches where it's like a multi-position switch, but it's digitally controlled. So where if you had like a SBDT, single pole double throw, that would be like 1 bit, and it would be switching the input between one or another output. Well, these chips, you've got 8 outputs, and it is a digital word specifying which one they connect to. So you could just use it for signal routing, like send your output of your synthesizer to 8 different channels. The 5.1 is an 8-position switch, and the 5.2 is 2 4-position switches following the same digital word for switching them. So they're in parallel, it's like a stereo. And you could use those going through resistors for like a mixer or something. You have an 8-position, 8 volume levels on the mixer or something like that. Or 8 different capacitors for different high-pass filter effects. Or you could get, see, here's the thing with stuff like this. There is already a module called the Blue Lantern Mini Shimmery that's based off of a kind of hi-hat style effect that you can do, where you've got these square waves, and setting up square waves and this kind of stuff is very easy. You just have the particular CMOS chip. It's a 40106. It's a Schmidt trigger inverter, and you need capacitors. I'm working on getting capacitors very, very cheaply. You need trim pots or potentiometers to adjust them. I've already got trim pots at 18 for $1, so you'd be able to have all of those. And then if you have, say, 3 different square waves, you can set up another thing where it is switching between 2 of the square waves at another audio frequency. And you do enough of that, you start getting white noise. And you do sort of half as much of that, and you start getting a cymbal sound. And again, it's all being done off of these very cheap and available chips. I'm thinking about setting up the chips at specifically 4 for $1, even though they'll cost me a little bit more just because they're so cool to have. And they're so nifty that I'd want to just kind of further that, as long as I'm not selling to electronics manufacturers like, oh, let's get these at 4 for $1 from this person and then continue to sell them for, we'll buy them back and then sell them again for 39 cents. So long as that's not happening, we're good. I'm also going to be talking to another company about like maybe getting some very bright LEDs that you can make Vactrols out of, or a large supply of this particular capacitor that I've found that is a 6 microfarad tantalum capacitor. Oh, no, the end goal is literally anything that you could imagine. That's the end goal. Like, getting all this stuff together is about getting a whole organization of parts into people's hands that they can start doing stuff. And it's not necessarily about setting people up with the ability to go into business manufacturing runs of things, because if you're doing that, 40106 is the Schmidt trigger inverter. You throw some capacitors and resistors onto that, and it makes a square wave oscillator. And there's also a place where you can take a kind of triangle wave oscillator out of it. If you amplify that, then that'll make it louder. But the end goal is the new website that I registered just this morning, and haven't put anything there yet, but it's coming together, and I finally sort of decided what I'm doing with it. This website will be called soldercore.art. It's kind of like a Yarrow rack principle, except for that it's like bare wires and chips and stuff. There's no printed circuits. You're wiring everything together with 22 gauge solid core. I am fixing to get 18 miles of 22 gauge solid core so that I can put it into people's hands for about 2 cents a foot, probably more like 2.5 cents a foot. And that means being able to also sell you a coil of wire that is a good long piece of wire for $1 to get you started, or a set of 10 different colors of wire also for $1. It wouldn't be quite as long of a piece, but it wouldn't be like an 8-inch length. It'd be more like maybe a 4 or 5 foot length times 10. And yeah, this is art. This is not just about making yourself be some kind of manufacturer and making multiple copies of the thing. It should be possible to do this as art. Like, just a sec here. I put these together to sort of demonstrate the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And I have showed people this. There's enough slots in this, like horizontal pitch, to take the $1 worth of perf board, and that is what it costs. This is $1 worth of this material, and put enough of these. It's going to wind up being like $20 worth of this by the time you filled it all up, but then you build all of your circuits together. And you could do a very elaborate and sophisticated synthesizer out of just bits like that. But that's sort of the configurable, performance-oriented, at least to some extent performance-oriented way of doing it. And it's particularly performance-oriented if you do stuff like get the kind of audio tape. It's either audio tape or the right kinds of VHS tape. Go into an old video store with a multimeter. And there's a picture of this on my Instagram. Press the multimeter leads to the inside panel of where the tape goes without opening it. And you can tell whether that is going to give you a tape that has resistance or no connection. Because if the tape inside the VHS tape, whatever it happens to be, is a fancy high-quality tape, it will have a coating on it, and it won't actually work for this purpose. If it's a cheap-ass tape, and I have, for instance, a old Maxell tape that is it's like 23K resistance, and a copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and a copy of Rain Man, and those each have a resistance. Those have a connection, and that is a resistance trace. So you could make a synthesizer where you were touching the surface of the tape and pressing it to, other tape, and playing the frequency that way, or touching various parts of the circuit to each other using that and getting really weird results, like patching the output into the input of a different one. And you could wind up with a weird conglomeration of crisscrossing tapes, touch it, and start doing crazy circuit bending behaviors. There's a lot that can be done. And lastly, since you're building stuff out of the easily available like solid core wire and these chips and things like that, and you can use stretcher strips for canvases, well, you could also get $1 worth of literally canvas, and it's all tacked together with simple thumbtacks. I'm probably also going to get a big old pile of these, probably from Amazon somewhere, unless I can find a better place, and figure out how many thumbtacks for $1 there is, so that can also be $1. And if you can thumbtack the board to this, you could also stretch some canvas over it and thumbtack that to the back. And you wouldn't even need like proper canvas stretching pliers or a staple gun, which is normally what you use. You wouldn't necessarily need those because you'd already have thumbtacks for putting this stuff together. And at that point, you're building an artwork using some of the same technologies that people use to build artworks that are sold. Like, you can take stretcher strips, stretch canvas onto it, paint oil paints or even acrylic paints, which are generally not considered to be quite as fancy as all that, but paint oil paints onto it. And if your work is brilliant enough, then you can resell that for thousands upon thousands of dollars if it's that popular of a single unique artwork, because the materials are archival. You build this properly, and people can buy it on the grounds of this is a unique thing that somebody built that is going to be around for tens, hundreds of years, because there aren't any parts in here that are going to disintegrate or go wrong. And it's sort of well-established techniques for building paintings and stuff, except for you'd also have electronic circuitry, and it would also be a musical instrument. And that is why the website that I registered this morning is called soldercore.art. The whole idea is getting these art materials into the hands of people who might not otherwise be able to afford them. Or if you can't afford all this kind of stuff, I'll tell you exactly where I got it all, and you can get mass quantities of it as well. I'm hoping that it'll leave some space for people who don't actually have the facility to be like, yeah, let me throw a few $100 towards this experimenter stuff, and then I'll be off and running. And then we can all get together and like put stuff together in live streams and such. And having done that, there'll also be a website where, like, if you're throwing your finished thing, you'd probably want to be able to make a YouTube video of it, even if it's recording it off of your phone, because what you will be making will be based on a structure that is fairly similar to a painting with a canvas and stretcher strip backing. It is indeed spelled soldercore. The website is not up yet. Somebody already owns soldercore.com, but I decided that soldercore.art would be fine. And so that's the one that I've registered. And because that's the point I'm trying to make. It's not necessarily about making people little entrepreneurs and everybody has to be able to like do the volume buying and stuff and then market their thing. You should be able to just create, and if you happen to make a very neat little device, you can also stretch some canvas over it. I'm going to set up in such a way that I can sell you a piece of canvas also for $1. It won't be a large piece of canvas necessarily, like it won't. You could probably get canvas that would cover a thing this big. $1 is not going to get you enough canvas to cover a thing this big, or even one panel of that. But if it gets into that, then, go to Michael's or something, buy one that already exists and cut it out of its frame and put it on yours. And get some acrylic paints from somewhere. It's the art thing that interests me about it. Because it's all very well doing stuff that is like, yeah, I'm selling kits for how to do this thing that I invented. Or, here, let's set you up with a way which you can be your own little entrepreneur and start your company from, you design a good oscillator, design a good, like, percussion device or something like that. But what's wrong with the idea of making stuff that is actually a one-off? You make a artwork, which, whether it be a thing on a single circuit board that can be put in a number of different frameworks and acting more like a synthesizer or a Eurorack system, Or you could take something like this, get a couple of the pieces of circuit board, maybe even just one. You'd have the circuit board here, and then you'd have canvas stretched here, and you do a little painting on the canvas, and the audio is you got your little power supply and jack, and it does a sound that accompanies the canvas, and that becomes your artwork. Send it to somebody and be like, yep, here's the thing that I made. This is I call this seashore, and it's a painting of the seashore, and the sound makes a seashore sound because you've got like noise generators or something in there. And it becomes a funky little thing that somebody built, and there is the handcrafted quality of it, and the way in which they're never going to be exactly the same. It's not like a printed circuit board. It's not a mass-produced object. It is a handcrafted artwork, and that to me is very interesting. Although what I should probably do is switch over to the coding side of things, because I've spent a little close to half an hour talking about this, because this is what I was doing all morning. I'm really pushing towards making this happen, and once I am satisfied with the amount of stuff that I've got together, I'll start incorporating it all together and doing live streams on that. I've already started doing live streams of the jams as starting last week, but building the sort of synthesizer artworks also feels like that would be very interesting. Honestly, I'd probably be doing a lot of the stuff based on treating them as synthesizers, just in this unusual way, where my patch cords will literally be lengths of this wire, which I'm going to get in such massive quantities that I'll be able to have it for very cheaply, and then you can have this wire too. But the way to connect something rather than build a patch cord with jacks and plugs and things is I'm going to get a hold of the kind of high quality IC sockets where you can strip the end of this, poke it into the socket, and it makes a super good connection. Like it'll carry about 2 amps of current if you wanted it to. And if you wanted to connect something else, unplug it from the IC socket and plug it into somewhere else. You'd have to have fairly good eyesight to do it. But that also means that you can use it for both permanent and temporary connections. And it also means that, kind of like with some of the Bastel designs, Bastel Castel, for instance, if you use the right gauge of wire, you don't have to get jumper wires. You can buy jumper wires, and those will work. But you can also strip 22 gauge wire, and that's exactly the same size as the pin connections on jumper wires that plug into IC sockets. And everything just becomes much more accessible. You can have it be color-coded, all of that kind of stuff. And that is... what I do as a inventor kind of person is think this stuff up, and I get excited when I have a vision on what the thing could be and can pursue it. So yeah, the domain name soldercore.art, of which there's nothing up yet, but I have purchased it, defines where I'm going with this. Now let's get back into some coding. What have we got here? That was the matrix verb idea I was working with. Now there was some maintenance I was going to do. In fact, I have said that this is Airwindows coding stream maintenance. So let's have a look at that. What were we doing? I know one thing I needed to do was look into clip only. But it wouldn't be the AU, because the AU of clip only is fine. There was a problem with the VST of clip only, and I need to investigate that. If indeed I can even find it here. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so maybe I'm not working on clip only right at the moment because I'm not finding it. Although I'm going to take a moment, and you can't see it, but I'm going to go to the GitHub and have a look at what actually was saved here. Mac VST should be satisfactory. There it is. And it'll be clip only proc. So float input sample L and input sample R for the float, and then double replacing, double input sample L, double input sample R. So that's actually not wrong. Should work. But I also need to manage the last sample L, and that, I think, I think I see what happened. This is me. I'm looking at this on the web because that's where it exists. So forgive me for that. Yep, found the bug. So I'm going to need to have last sample L and last sample R be defined as a double rather than a float in the H file. I don't have that handy right now as far as what I'm doing. And yeah, I mentioned bass amp. That at least I will be able to do on stream. So let's have a look at that. I found the problem with clip only. So whoever it was who was complaining about clip only, I think they've been in some of my streams. I found the problem. I figured out what it is. I will be fixing it forthwith. I won't be fixing it on stream because, as you can see in my list of plugins and stuff there, that's one of the plugins I don't have handy on the smaller collection of these that I have in here, unless it's in dithers. Let's check. Could it be? I think maybe I can. Okay. There's clip only AU. I don't know why I had that in. I guess it's in dithers because these are the ones that put them. Let me just do this. I just didn't have it in the plugins list. I had it in the dithers list. And let's scooch this over so you can see it. Oh, interesting. Why is it doing that? Let's go and load up in one of the other recent projects. Like, what do we just do? We're working on bass amp, so I know that has the value I want, so boop. It's looking for that to be in there, and that probably also means that, okay, now I'm second guessing myself. Can you tell why I'm wondering about this? That's there, yes, but that's not necessarily part of what clip only does, so I'm a little confused. Why is it asking for that? That's bass amp, never mind. Go away, bass amp. I don't want you right now. Why is it looking for FPD? Shouldn't be using that. Clip only has no control, so this is all there is in there. Double is going to be 64-bit float most likely. The thing is, if you really want to specify, you're going to use a kind of value that specifically says 64 in there somewhere. However, in general, double is always going to be larger than float. There's rules around that. See, the way that works is if you're using there's rules in C about what these things can mean in various different systems. Like say you're running on, as if an Atari VCS could run C code. You're running on a 6502, an Apple II Plus. C, the language, can deal with that stuff, but it has requirements about like, well, if your processor can't do 32-bit numbers, what do we call the double? What do we call the float? And what it specifies is float is never going to be more bits than doubles, and so on. So, yeah. I think double has to always be 64-bit. I'm not absolutely positive. Because the thing is that double means double precision, and regular precision for a floating point number would be 32 bits, so double precision is logically going to be 64. I just can't guarantee it. On normal platforms, that's how it's going to be. So let's get into this for a second. Clip only has no controls. That's what we see here. Clip only shouldn't require FPD. So let's take that back out. It was complaining about the lack of it, but I feel like that's not a reasonable complaint. Why was it looking for it? It was looking for it because it was doing that. Do we have the end bit? No, we do not. So here's the deal. Clip only is supposed to touch the audio so lightly that it doesn't do hardly anything unless it's actually clipping. Here's what's going on with this build. I'm not exactly sure why this is happening, but and that means I should probably have a look at the AU clip only in case anything else is changing there. So I will have a quick glance at that. AU clip only, again, this is not dithering to floating point because it is passing through what's already there. Clip only is supposed to really not touch a damn thing unless you actually need to. So I think what's happening here is this has some extra stuff added in, the denormals code, and that denormals code doesn't belong here. So what I'm going to do is This is a hard clip for super high output because it's going to clip anyway, but it's helping control it. PyWhackit on reamped material today. And it brings up noise floor and creates a high... Very likely that stuff is going on, yeah. PyWhackit is its own kind of thing. I think you're probably seeing an interleaved process in there. It's doing every other sample for something. Basically, if you're running into stuff like that, you might want to look at a different compressor because it's specifically made to be not like your typical compressor. And the reason that crazy small numbers of 1.180 minus 43, this is denormalization code, or it was, I took it away. That means I can build clip only. Now, the AU build always does this. I don't have a build folder in there. And you'll notice that this one says float 32. AUs don't use 64-bit math, so there's no reason to make it be double precision. Build it again. Now it's fine. And same deal with the VSD program, which I have here. And this is what you were seeing before, 43 or 37. This is denormalization code, and it's complaining about FPD because I don't actually have the facility to do that or to do dithering to floating point because clip only is supposed to not touch a single thing unless it actually has to clip the value. So what we're going to do is edit that and take it right out. And the 1.18e minus 37, that is a denormalization value that'll work on a 32-bit floating point and not cause the CPU to grind on that stuff too much. Then over here, same deal, but 43, that's the 64-bit denormalization. And having done this, here's our AD clip code, and it's in stereo. There's our output. And I'll save and look again. And now we have changed latch sample L and R to be double precision, meaning that it'll work for the 32-bit, and it'll just have a little extra information, but now it'll also work for the 64-bit VST hosts. And this fixes that bug. Boop. Might be able to upload the fix later today, because there's some other stuff we're looking at too, but boop, boop. So what I often like doing is here, I will drag it over into the components as well. I do not actually need to replace the AU because there's no change to the AU other than I just recompiled it. But I will be needing to replace the VST for people who need the update. There's the build folder of that. I'm also going to be grabbing the folders here and putting them on a USB stick, both to make the Windows and Linux versions of it, but also to bring the source code over to my main computer and then upload them to GitHub and everything, because the bug fix is going to also go into the open source repository. And let's see, clip only VST. Option drag that to the folder so we can replace it. And this is the bug fixed version. That was what was wrong with it. It'll be in the Windows code base once I have built the Windows version of it. But that is the debugged VST problem. Oh, I bet tremolo square, what happens on a sine wave, tremolo square should be switching on and off at the zero cross points of the sine. If it's doing anything else, I'm deeply surprised. With any distortion plugins, it would, here's the deal. With the distortion plugin, if you're running at like CD quality and you have a sine wave, which doesn't have any frequencies, it has one frequency basically, and the sine wave is at 18 kilohertz, well, technically that can be contained within a CD quality encoding, but any change to it, any harmonic generated in it is going to alias. So essentially, as far as the frequency, trying to create the frequencies above Nyquist, it depends upon what you're feeding in. If you're feeding in a 60 hertz sine wave, a bass tone, then you can throw quite a number of harmonics on there and they won't alias. But if you have a frequency that is already too close to Nyquist, you can't do anything with it. So calculating something like that would be upsampling it massively and then dealing with it from there. So it would be very CPU hungry, yeah. Let's get into some of the other stuff we were looking at, like bass amp. Did not have bass amp working, and I'll show you why. It's because, let's see now. I think I'll be able to hear this here. Is this still on? I think so. You can barely hear that, right? Oh yeah, I can tell you why it does that, Joku. And then let's get bass amp. Here's the problem. We've got the dry signal, but there's a hissy quality to this. It's not supposed to be there. And then there's the subsonic frequency. We got a lot of hissy noise going on in there, and I need to figure out what went wrong. Something went wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. You hear the sort of wheezing behind it. Whereas if we did something like a similar process that was, say, let's see, bass kit, I think that will show us a thing. It's supposed to be more like that. Supposed to be adding a boost to the lows, but without that sort of noisy effect going on. And I heard that and I was like, whoa, this is clearly wrong. I can't put this out today. Quit out of there. So yeah, the thing about running something to tremolo square is, since it is changing only at zero crossings, that is providing frequency modulation to the frequency that you're using. If the frequency modulate, it's like doing a rig modulation thing. So, I'm trying to think of it, I just had a sine in here right now. So let's do this. This is not necessarily a 460 hertz sine, but let's see what we get. Recent effects, tremolo square. So there is a bass note that is going on and off, controlled by tremolo square. Now it's turning on and off at very close to the frequency of the sine wave. But if I take it slightly off, it's like a ring modulator effect. Think of it like the onset and offset of the square wave is aliasing in its own peculiar way. It's not happening in a way where it'll create a harsh high frequency effect, but because it's being delayed until the zero crossing, it will interact with the sine wave or any other kind of wave. Like with that, what you're getting, it's a high enough frequency that it's allowing only one cycle to go on, and it's turning on and off in an arbitrary way. And that's actually a subharmonic frequency. Yeah, this is a sine. And we can do the same thing with a high sine. You'll be able to hear this much more clearly. If I take this and do a tremolo square, here's what you get. So this is working as intended. kind of like aliasing, but all it's doing is isolating the times that it can turn on or off based on whether it's crossing zero or not. So you go from here to here. And there you have it. So yeah, that is what you get running a sine wave to tremolo square. And that is the weird thing it does. Let's get back to bass amp. Bass amp was not working, it was broken. We're going to find out what went wrong. Some of this is, I like to not code these ways anymore because all this like ATA half sample and so on is a attempt at anti-aliasing, but I don't think it worked very well. So what I need to do is figure out what's happening there. And here's how I might go about that. So I'm not as worried about suboctave. The problem I was having was with the bass amp gain. Other parts of this, like this high pass, because this is a high pass, is not giving me a problem necessarily, although I can comment this out too. But the problem I was having was, if I'm not mistaken, in head bump. That's here. So I remember how this is done. I'm looking at how this works. Switch B flip. You know, I do believe I understand what's causing some of this. And for some reason I decided that this was a good idea. Oh, am I supposed to have other languages in there? I don't speak other languages, so I can't. Anyways, if you were being a proper programmer, you'd be doing it as an array, and it would be a 26-element array, so there you go. I bet I can make that noise go away. And I'm not sure why I had as much of this, or why I wanted this, but I did, apparently. Firstly, let's just get rid of this entirely. There. If I'm not mistaken, oh yeah, the umlauts and things. Yeah, I don't speak those very well, I'm afraid. Save, build it. I have removed the build folder, so it's starting over with its English alphabet. I gotta let it do that stuff and then try it again, because it needs to refer to stuff inside the build folder that it only builds the first time around. It's the audio unit thing. And having done so, let's switch away from there. And let's do a little, and it's also worth asking, like, to some extent, do we want this noisy effect anywhere? I've gone off it. It's like, I don't know what I was doing with it in the first place, but I don't think I like it anymore. I don't know why I called that bass amp. To me, it doesn't seem as if it makes much sense anymore, but we'll see. And I'll fire up, let's fire up Alien Kittens. Been a while since we've heard that. And quickly reacquaint ourselves with what was broken, which is this. Oh, it's even more broken than I thought. Look what it did. set it to 0 and then it went zoink and broke. So that's worth looking at. Something went wrong there. It is letting me start it over again though. So that's got the noisy, hissy noise as part of it, which got by me before. But if I... Oh, hang on. That's not right. Put it in the wrong place. Let's do that over. Boop. Now we go back and we've just told that random value, which I had in there. Complicated as it may be, it's probably worth me seeing whether I can make that break again. I bet it's going to do exactly the same thing. Now, I think this is more what it's supposed to be. That hissy quality is not there anymore. Interestingly, it's also not breaking now. There's the thing. Although I can plainly hear a bit of zipper noise there. Some of these are... There's our sub-frequency. It is also not hissing quite the same way as the other time. And you can also tell that you can overdrive it in an interesting way. Like definitely kind of clipping. And then here's our highs. Combine those two things and you'll have a kind of bass ampy sound. And then a bit of dry. Bring in mid-range if you want it. So I would call this time to refactor a bit, because here's the deal. It just started behaving itself by taking out this part here, the Randy equals 0. What that means is and now I'm thinking about what went on. Oh, I think I could debug it another way. My dad died a couple of years back, yeah. I had stopped drinking good 27 years before that point, though. Do you see with me what I'm seeing here as far as what's causing Randy to make a bright noise rather than what I was after? Because head bump is one of those IIR things where it's interleaving on a 3-sample basis just cause. Like, you could have a single IIR filter do this. And there are other places where I've done exactly that. This one and sub bump, I decided to have it be the 3-way. And what that means is sounds going into it are going to have this funny sort of high frequency issues. But what's causing the noise I don't like is this. I've got Randy in here, that's a random value. It's supposed to be taking the signal, these 3 sort of bins of stuff, and alternating between them. Like B flip is going 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 because I just decided that was how I wanted to do it, and that's part of what gives it its sound. Randy is supposed to be blurring between the 3. It's blurring them together. But can you tell what's going on? If I had only 2 of these things, I would have an output where like IR head bump A equals 1 minus 0 minus Randy times itself plus Randy times IR head bump B. That would be interpolating between the one and the other. Depending upon what the randomness was, it would go from the one to the other. But it's not doing that. Instead, it's adding twice as much of the other ones. Oh, Memphis. Hey, Memphis. I can't help you with the SB1200 and inflator thing, I don't think. But we're doing something else right now, so... yeah, I gotta say, I'm super not interested with trying to code a emulation of the SB1200 because those already exist. Like, I don't want to do over again something that other people have done. And it's the same deal with, like, inflator is done by, it's a Sonox, it's the Sony Oxford. That's done by Paul Frindle. I like Paul Frindle. I don't want to steal this thing. Yeah. Let's focus on this thing, because this is very much my thing. And it's buggy right now, but I can probably fix it. So, here. I can add a change to these times 0.5 times. Any order will have the same effect. The end result of this will always be half as much as it was before. You see how I've got this going on? And then we're adding some of this, but when I add it just like that, it's twice as much because I'm doing it in two places. But then if I take this, tuck it into this code, everywhere it isn't the 1.0 minus, it's more calculation, but what the hey, this is an older plugin, so I might as well honor what it was trying to do from the beginning. And I'm just adding this 0.5 here, because what was happening, I was doing a thing where it's like 1 minus this plus this times another thing, and they were supposed to equate out to the same amount. But if I have two instances of that, then the Randy aspect isn't just crossfading between the two things. Instead, it's making the thing be louder than it should be. And that's where that noise was coming from. I've just changed that. I've got the noise thing back. I'm not exactly sure how that got past me or what happened. But I have a feeling that when I run this one, let's give it a try now. Bass amp into the components folder. And if I can do that, I know what to do for the VST, and I can update that as well. Let's go back to Alien Kittens, because that's a bassy noise. And aha. So does everybody follow what I did to fix that? Because now bass amp does this. Oh, it sounds like shit, man. Well, that's because it's supposed to be bassy, man. It's supposed to sound like a bass speaker cab of some kind. I'm pretty sure that's why I was doing that. And then you can hear the grindiness of the sub because we're not feeding it a single note. But you can also hear that it is no longer doing the problem that the previous one had. And I seem to be not able to make it crash by fiddling with this knob, so that's good. Let's find something that has bass notes in. Sine basses? No, I don't think so. I don't know, we could find out though. You probably can't hear these played directly. Well, kinda. barely. Now, the previous version of bass amp, it made a kind of hissy noise that was obstructive. Let's see if this makes it sound a little bit more like you could hear what these sine waves are doing over the small speaker, because if we can do that, that's one of the reasons for running bass amp. You can see that this is sine waves. In particular, when it stops at the beginning there, you can see it's a sine wave in there. What we're doing is amplifying it in such a way that you're getting a tone out of it. The overtones are part of the algorithm. That's what's happening. I'll show you what those do in just a moment. Here's our dry signal again. And high will make it, the transitions make a nasty noise. Yeah, the thing is, you shouldn't have to do the SP to get this result. I do a lot of stuff along the lines of being able to get, like, if it wasn't an SP, would you associate that sharp, spiky punch with good? Or are you just looking for something to do the right thing? That's the concern. Also, while we're at it, let's do this. I'm going to apply this and close it and then just not save it. You saw how it was a sine wave? This is what it makes. The end result ends up looking like this. It's a sort of funky shape. In fact, it's no longer even perfectly symmetrical. It's a little bit pointy on the front. It's a little bit asymmetrical. So that's what bass amp is supposed to do. And I think we'll call that a successfully negotiated bug fix. But we still have to go back and let's see, first of all, let's open this back up again. Build. Save that. Close it. Option drag to components, which is no different than what I just did. And I like to put it at the bottom of my screen here. And now we're going to go and do the VST the same way. And again, I'll do the Windows versions later. So, Mac VST. And the rest of it was fine. So we're going to have a look at this. It's got all this stuff going on in here. And it is using the denormalization code there. We got our distortions and stuff going on. And then here's our low frequency section sitting around in there. It's after it says Randy double rand max. And if you remember, I think I might even still have it on my paste. These things in here need to change from this to this. Because what was happening to make that noise was, yeah, if the bass amp is an old plugin and it's the way I had it, then it was broken and it's better for me to fix it and not be concerned about having it be exactly the same as the old one, because the old one apparently was too busted, or maybe I didn't even put it out. I might have done it and then been like, Oh, it's making a high frequency hissy noise. That's wrong. I don't know what's making that happen. Oh no. And then I would have to stop and it wouldn't put it out. It would be this. It is this 1.0 minus Randy plus Randy times this plus Randy times this. And again, if I had deleted this part so that I was taking this and making it be the same as 1.0 minus this very small amount times itself plus the small amount times a different other thing, that's crossfading them, that's blending them. If they're similar sounds, like on a bass frequency, they're not going to be very different. What was happening was I was crossfading it, but then the new value was being added twice, and so if there was randomness in there, it would poke up twice as much, and that would be a problem. M has an interesting point. Let me talk about that while I'm doing the remainder of these, because this is fairly straightforward. I just have to spot all of them. I'm having to spot all the ones where it doesn't say 1.0 minus, and it's twice as many as in the before because this is a stereo plugin. So you're talking about why our fancy amplifier is something rather than class AB, and I'll tell you. In fact, I can even demonstrate that. And again, the thing about it is that I am inserting 0.5 because what I'm doing, this area that I've selected, it's like I'm trying to crossfade between this place that says LIR sub bump A. It starts out like that, right? It's the same as an IR filter, whereas if I was making it be very much the same thing, I could have it following code like this, and then it would be this equals 1.0 minus some very, very small number times itself. And that takes it, it goes from like 10 to say 9. And then plus some new thing, we'll say that new thing is like a 10. And so it would be the same. And you say times that plus what was missing out of the original one. Like remember it's having Randy on one side and 1.0 on one side. I don't think I have my dry wet code in here, but I do think I have it on. That's in code for compressors. That's not what I was looking for. Maybe I don't have that code handy. But when I have dry wet code, it's usually implemented as you got an input sample and dry sample, right? Dry sample is what you started with. Input sample is what you process, and I usually end up with using it still. I don't often end up calling it like, now it's output sample. Usually I just go with like, that's the name I used for it. So if you're doing a dry wet, you go, okay, this is how much wet signal, and you go wet equals 0 to 1, right? 1 is full wet. And then you go output sample equals input sample times dry plus, dry sample times dry plus your end result times wet. If wet is 1, then you end up with all of that and none of the original signal. If you have wet as 0, it'll be organized like dry sample times 1.0 minus wet plus end result sample times wet. Very similar to what I've got in here. Like I will scooch that up so that I can copy it. If I delete this bit, and I need to not just delete it, but also cut it so that I can paste it back, what we've got here is a thing like a dry wet. You can probably see it's showing on the screen, right? Where it's 1.0 minus Randy, which ends up being a very small number, plus Randy times something else. And you can see that it starts with, like, this is also part of it. So this is like a dry wet code. It's like saying this equals itself times this thing plus new thing, which it says LIR plus sub bump B, but it's just a name, plus Randy times this. So it's a number that goes between, it actually winds up being a very small number, but it could be anything. And it is a number that goes between 1 and 0. So if it wasn't there at all, it would be like 1.0 minus 0, namely 1, times LIR sub bump A, which is that times itself, which is same thing, no change, plus 0 times sub bump B, new thing, nothing's happening. You could have it be, this is also how you do an IIR filter as well as how you do a dry wet calculation. You can also have it be like, instead of Randy, consider it to be 0.5, say that it's like a half. Then you have sub bump A equals 1.0 minus 0.5, in other words, a half again. So you just take that number, multiply it by a half, it's become half of what it was, plus the other thing, sub bump B, times a half. And the deal is, if you're having a signal changing, and both of these are part of a large waveform, they're going to be very similar numbers, so crossfading between them isn't going to make that much of a difference. If you were doing a thing where you're trying to chase a value but have it not react too quick, you'd do it kind of like this. Instead of sub bump A, it would be, this is my control that's not moving too quickly. And it's control that's not moving too quickly times 1 minus some very small amount plus the intended new value that you're trying to reach times the very small amount. And what you end up doing is, if you have the new value coming in, we'll call it like IR sub bump B here, then eventually the other value is going to catch up. Eventually the other value is going to catch up with it. But it'll take a while. And if this thing that we're currently calling Randy, which is the amount of effect that has on it, gets larger, then it'll chase the new value coming in faster. So that's all I've got for that at the moment, I think. I'm going to go back to continuing the debug, because we were actually trying to debug the problem of this, and I think we can fairly do that at that stage. See, this is the kind of, sometimes I get hung up on this as well. Like, the reason this came out and I didn't post it was because this got by me. I'm stumbling over all this, like, times LIR sub bump B and sub bump C and so on and so forth, and I missed the fact that I had a calculation going on here where I was adding twice as much of something as I needed to. I was doing an interpolation that was blending between two, it's like crossfading between two things, but I crossfaded wrongly, and it was adding too much of the new information coming in. So since it was a random factor, it came out as a random noise, but doesn't have to be that way, and we're fixing it now. By punching in this one value, meaning that the new information coming in, there's two of them, but they're each half as big. and they add up to the same as if there was only one of them balanced against this other thing, which is 1.0 minus the new information coming in. Some people would find this so revoltingly trivial that they'd be like, you are an idiot, Chris. What are you even doing? Why are you coding at all? And yeah, it's fair, but I choose to. And people who are so smart that they see stuff like that and go, you're so stupid, Chris. Why would you ever do that? That's an obvious dumb. Well, people like that wouldn't be trying this stuff with the audio anyhow, because they'd be like, I want a filter. Here is a filter from the filter cookbook. I will use that. And so their stuff isn't going to sound like my stuff does. So those are kind of the risks you run. And this is now, actually I have two spaces in here. That isn't going to do anything, but I'm still going to tidy it up because it's untidy. There's no reason for that to be the way it is. Find all of the spots with two spaces and remove them. However far that is. Also, thankfully, I'm just pasting, because the thing is, if I could have been cut and pasting whole areas there, but then if I pasted in the place where it says RIS sub bump A into the wrong spot, and it started referring to different things, it would become very confusing, which is why I would tend not to, like, stuff is organized in such a way where it's like, okay, these are the L's, these are the R's. The algorithm says sub bump A plus sub bump B plus sub bump C. And I'd be doing it that way so that I could have some kind of orientation and more or less tell what I'm up to, in hopes that I don't like paste the wrong thing in and then it starts doing something wrong and I don't know why. Anywho. I see that this other area has an extra space in as well. So let's go and take the extra spaces out of where this was. I wonder whether the audio unit also had that. I guess I'll probably go and open that back up again and find out. Otherwise, when it goes up on the GitHub, there'll be like random extra spaces that don't belong. And that doesn't affect the way it compiles, but I'll still want to do something about it. When we get into stuff like this, that's what becomes really gruesome. Like, I try to not code stuff like this anymore. This dates from like 2007 or something like that. And I was trying to do something very interesting and complicated, but it was very difficult and gruesome, especially since at the time, I was not keeping track of defining variables near where they're going to be used, which is a way of being able to simplify stuff. Like if you have a variable like reta diff sample, and you're always going to be using it like right in here, you might go that, and then it doesn't show up anywhere else because it's not happening up until that point. And only when you reach that point you go, okay, we need another variable to do this thing with. Therefore, let's tell it to do this. And then you wind up having the new stuff happening, but it's contained within the area that you're using it. Sometimes that's in a very literal sense too. Rather than big list of variables up at the top that there's no telling what they are. I've done a lot of that in my time, and it's not really a good way of doing it. So I'm learning bit by bit, but what we're seeing here is much of the old code that I'm kind of keeping old style somewhat, simply because that's what it was at the time. And let's build this. And it built correctly. I'm going to close out of there. Go to the release folder. Put it into VST, move it over here where I can get it later. And then I'm going to go back and see whether the double space thing is in here too. We shall see. Kinda. Yep. I see where the extraneous spaces are sitting, and I want that to stop. See, it's not here, but this one has an extra space, so I do want to tidy that up. I'm glad that I went back to fix it. Not sure how that got past me. And it's a head bump. And since the audio unit is what's called N2N, meaning that it's not a stereo plugin unless you specifically tell it to be, audio units do something special that the VSTs don't do, which is that if you're using the audio unit that is end-to-end, it'll do one channel. It'll load this on channel by channel basis. So you can load bass amp on a single track, and it saves the extra effort of not doing stereo channels like the VSTs do. Or you can load it on a quad or a 5.1 track, and then it will do the same processing on every channel of the 5.1 track. If you defined a special value where it's like, this is my 8-channel mix as a single audio file, it would run on all 8 channels in parallel. Now let's see, I don't have to rebuild that one because that was already fine. But what I'm going to want to do is we'll fire up all alien kittens again, and first let's hear bass amp. You hear the distortiness of it. The sub is weird because it's not a monophonic thing, it's a full mix. And then we'll open up the VST and test that. VST bass amp. I'm going to call that fixed. Woot. So in one stream we have now fixed clip only, and we fixed bass amp, and bass amp is ready for next week. Cool beans. And let's see now. What else? I was gonna look after some of those. This is probably worth doing. Let's look at some of these biquad filters. As far as I'm concerned, none of them should have inverse dry wet controls. And I know they started out not having that. So let's see at what point that changed. Because at some point I started having that in there. Now we're looking at the audio unit. So this is how it's defined. It's a biquad. If I look at biquad.h, we're seeing these values. This one's now labeled inverse dry wet, and that's a little puzzling. I wonder whether that was that. So here's a question. Oh, you're curious about the sub? Let me take a moment to deal with that. Sub is not like an FFT calculation that's going to take the entire thing and scale it down. Sub is following the waveform on a cycle-by-cycle basis. So, bass amp. We can follow those notes, that being these frequencies. Sub is a well, the thing about sub is it's an undertone. And the problem with doing that is that if you don't have a clean note, like here, I'll load up high sign. You should be able to get, with this primitive calculation, the note and an octave down. But it's counting cycles to do that. So if you're listening to music and it is not, I wonder whether I can get a sawtooth. Again, if we have a single note, monophonic note, it's going to give you an octave down. But as you ask, if we're doing music, let me pick something. I might be able to find a track in Dragons that here's your music. Let's pick the beginning to Wood Dragon. It sounds like this. Starts out as a monophonic sound. There's some reverb, which is going to confuse matters. And then other stuff happens. And you got multiple notes. If you use the octave divider thing here, and again, that's going to be the same deal with like BassKit or any of the other stuff that uses this technique. If we do the bass amp part, yeah, it's going to be in mono. It's a mono microphone. That's filtered, but that's not an octave divider. If we use the octave divider, first of all, I ain't hear nothing. And it's wanting some of W to be there to work, so I turn it right up. What we get is when because this is using like a really primitive octave divider technique like you would find in some old guitar stomp boxes. What you get is at first you're starting to hear the octave down, and then as soon as too many other frequencies are interfering, oh, settle down, Joe. As soon as too many other frequencies are interfering, the octave divider circuitry that is just counting cycles is too confused. Oh no, more SP1200 people. And then as soon as too much stuff is happening, it ain't nothing but noise. Although, I'll point out that as the bass kicks in, that's taking up so much space that once the bass kicks in, it's louder enough that you get something of a suboctave effect, even though other stuff is happening. Again, simple note. Something of the subs. Bass. And you can almost kind of hear a note in there when the lows are so heavy that the octave divider is tracking them anyway. Let's take a minute, rather than doing more coding, let's explore some of the Airwindows existing bit reduction things. Because I got a lot of them, and I would have you understand that. Here's BitGlitter. That's largely a sample rate crush. So that doesn't sound that much like an SP1200. But other things we've got are things like, let's see, what else have we got here? Big ol' list. This was a fun one. Maybe not quite the same, but Debugging has its qualities. You might not have known that Debugging had sort of tone-crushing qualities. I remember there was stuff in there. Like, I sympathize because it's really very difficult because there's so damn much going on here, but there was stuff I had that, let's see, not Evertrim, Fracture, not useful, Glitch Shifter, we've been through that. Grooveware has some qualities to it. Let's, here, have a listen to Crunchy Grooveware for a sec. How does that sound? Without? Kick it in. You might want to look into that. You wouldn't have known it because it's not a bit reduction. Crunchy Grooveware. Again, without. Hear how it's kind of going down. Because I know part of the deal with the Akai sampler stuff is you use it and everything gets kind of heightened and colored and changed. And that's why I think Crunchy Grooveware might be interesting to you in this context. Like, find a setting on this that's doing something useful. Or here, let me over to another one. Here's a noisy one. Now if I engage Crunchy Grooveware, is this starting to get what you needed? That's starting to sound like the top of a sampler. You can darken it a lot, sure. And you'd probably be using it at apply cranked up all the way. Or let's find yet another one. Ice. Earth Dragon. Let me see if I can find some. Maybe Wood Dragon is actually the best. Yeah, with this one at least we have that ride symbol in there. Here's the deal. You're asking me for an SP1200 emulation. I don't need stuff like that. But listen to what Crunchy Grooveware does to the top. Is this not in the same zone? See? I got you covered, but you wouldn't have known to look for that. You can dial it in. Bright, darker. And off. Wanna hang on now. I make plugins as plugins for a reason. New effect stack. Add effect. Recent effects. Crunchy Grooveware. Set to here. I'm not sure Butterworth is necessarily what you're going to want. Let's have a look at what we can do with an averaging filter, because what it sounds like is you wanted that effect, but then also a low pass after it. So, add effect. I'm going to assume that we want a averaging filter, Avermatrix, for instance. Might not even need that, but and then we got our inf dry wet. We're going to have it be 1. That reminds me of the inf dry wet I was going to do, but that's going to be for another day. Both of these are engaged. So now we're listening to only Crunchy Grooveware. Dial that in. That sounds like that might be in the zone. Then averaging. So before, after. How's that grab you? You got to build this stuff out of the tools that you can have. You can't just be waiting for me to build it for you. Also, let me take a moment. Butterworth is a filter slope. It is not just a filter. Butterworth is like, what, 12 dB per octave or something? It is only a filter slope. You can do it from anything. That's not to say that I'm necessarily doing it with this average. I was trying to get a particularly analog-y kind of sound thing. But now you're looking for a 1200, so describe what that would sound like more. So we got this. It starts from here. Like I can start with there. Oh, well, in that case, let's try a steeper averaging filter. And maybe make it a little darker like this. That's about 0.354. There is no such thing as 120 dp per octave Butterworth. Butterworth is a slope, which is not 120 dp per octave. Poles of Ever Matrix. No filtering or anything, and I'll kick it in. That's nice and dark. So here, what we're doing here is Crunchy Grooveware is adding the color to stuff, otherwise it wouldn't be nearly the same. And then Avermatrix is stomping the highs very aggressively. We can go farther, by the way. You start introducing nodes in when you do this, but... So this is completely unfiltered. And then since you want it to go a lot darker, poles on Avermatrix is going to get you more of what you're looking for, because that will make it steeper, but it's still an averaging filter. And you won't be using a full average here. Like, if it was only one pole, this is not very much. It's going from 1 to 2. Barely anything happens. But if you put lots of instances of that in, it gets much darker. Nice little synthesizer horn there, right? So yeah, I would say use this combination of plugins and see where you get. Neither of those plugins were plugins you would have found looking for just bit reduction. In fact, there is no bit reduction going on here, but this is going to get you closer than you otherwise would. Although, hey, we could reduce bits too. Let's stop that and add a bit reducing plugin in the middle. 'Cause why not? Let's add it after the... Let's see now, what did I call that? I don't think bit glitter is the one I want. Derez. Question is derez or derez 2? I'm going to say regulation derez because, oh, and I'm looking in the, I might as well look in the Airwindows rather than the VST because it'll look a little prettier. So here we go. Now we're going full on. Although, no, there it is. And here is our sequence of plugins for trying to do the SB1200 thing. I think with this, you can dial it in to be any variation on that you want. Like do it for tones. And Joku, you can have any arbitrary number of poles that are each Butterworth and it will make it go steeper. But Butterworth is a slope. Butterworth is a Q factor specifically. When you stack them up, you get a steeper slope. Alrighty, so let's see. What can we get here? Let's do this one step at a time. It might be easier to hear D-Res this way, so I don't think I even want to use D-Res for the sample rate thing. I'd rather use Crunchy Grooveware for that. I think that'll be more convincing. But that's much too low. But that's getting kind of in the zone of around 12-bit or so. Let's see whether we can get an interesting interaction here. See, if I fiddle with this one, I'll get a much more aggressive sample rate chop. And we haven't darkened it yet, remember? So how are we doing in this zone then? Let's set this back again. I'm still working on only that one. Maybe I should use a different... Let's save this. That's not to say that I've successfully done it, but if I save that, I can get out of here and throw in something else. Shall we, for our last 5 minutes or so of hanging out, do a drum sound or another full mix? Because that's the thing. What do we got here? Oh, I just moved that. Oh well. What do we got here? Okay, bright hats, bright symbols. If we can't get into the zone of the Akai thing with this, I don't know what we can do. Let's start from there because there's those crashes, and I bet I can figure out what's going on with the crashes. And we'll load up Effect Stack again and see what we got. So here's where we're going from. Now, if we don't try to do the D-Res, we get this. Now let's take the average out so we can really hear the raw edge of what our faux Akai is doing. Or we can zero in on it. We'll do the inverse. Now we're listening to only the brights that we're going to be filtering away. So no derez. This is no derez and no crunchy grooveware. Bring in the crunchy grooveware. That's starting to sound like the kind of mid-rangey thing we're looking for. And then we sample rate crush it like this. We want to crush the hell out of it. And a little 12-bitization. Not this much, but then a darkening effect. I don't think acceleration is going to help because I'm not trying to darken it there necessarily. Although one thing we could do is reverse the positioning. No, I don't believe that. What happens when we do derez first? I'm not sure I really believe that, but it might be in the zone. We've got a wide range of control over this. Going from 1 full bright to like 1.4 or 1.5 is really doing a treble control for this. I still feel that taking derez out of there might be more helpful. Because it's so aggressive, you see. That, or let's fool with derez 2 in here. Same deal, but now we have an additional control to play with. So great. And the hard control. Just getting the thing. Then use the averaging to sample it down. So this is a very extreme effect coming from this. it's taking that hi-hat, taking this, turning it into this. Now come on, keep talking about SP1200s and stuff. This is the type of thing you're trying to do, yeah? And this is how it's done. Go from here to this. We're starting with a really aggressive crunchy grooveware, which is not a bit crusher plugin. We're using DRes 2 in a really screwed up zone, and then Avermatrix is softening it with a very many frequently. Yeah, I know I don't have it drawn straight through. Memphis, man, I've never owned one. I don't come from that scene. I'm about the synthesizers and things. I get enough hard times about trying to make anything. Dude, seriously. My point here being not simply that, but no, not good riddance. It's fine, he's just getting frustrated too quickly, and damn if I can tell what he's after. But, I will say, dude, you can't get mad at me for not knowing how an SP1200 sounds when I've never owned one. That just ain't fair. Besides, I can turn a sound from this into this, and that's kind of in the zone, or it's in a zone at least. And then there's a whole wide range. I was being told, like, oh, you're in the 750 range. Well, that's brighter, kind of like this. We can make it be a lot more like the newer one, like no change, sampling. But I was being asked for really old school, so when I was being asked for really old school, I went for dark, bit crush, and a lot of this quality going on. And I feel like that is actually very different from like standard bit crush effect. Not at all the same thing. But this is how I would go about that kind of concern. Like if I was trying to do a thing like that, and again, not having ever used a 1200, I would be starting with the raw sound. I would use Crunchy Grooveware to get it kind of funkier like that. DRes to bit crush it. Seem to not like that very much. And then I would be choosing Avermatrix for the steep anti-alias, the post anti-aliasing filter there, because it does a better job of darkening stuff up when it's really aggressive. And I would be finding whatever zone in there Like if I wanted insanely dark and trashy, you could do a really severe de-resing on it, but that's far from what you get without the filtering. And it's far from what you get without Crunchy Grooveware, which is adding some extra energy in there. But that's just what I would do. So yeah, I will see. I mean, this might end up becoming a bit of a running gag, folks. If it turns out that people just want to come around and yell at me for not doing a good SP1200 emulation, I don't know what to tell you. That's what I would do if I was trying to do a thing like that, is get into the zone, and if it's frustrating that I'm not going in the right direction, go and get me a 1200 so that I can play with it and use it and get experience with it. I don't know what else to say. I've never had one. I was actually being told the 950 I was getting closer to that. But there's the problem right there, is I don't necessarily even gravitate towards that, much less have it burned into my brain that this is what hip-hop is supposed to sound like. So, yeah, I guess more will be revealed in that maybe there will come a day, like, I have some more debugging to do in the sense of I've got a plugin that was kind of inspired by that stereo widener thing that Chad of Beauty Pill likes, and it made him really sad because I did that and I based it off of stuff I learned from an old Popular Mechanics article on the thing, but I didn't have it cranking out the side, and so he was all let down and was like, yeah, this does, thanks anyway though. And I need to revisit it in such a way that I go and find the side channel and then just crank that out and make it super loud. And that might get more into the zone, because the thing is, I went and bought one of those stereo widener devices that he was talking about. Not exactly the one, because those are impossible to find anymore. But I went and bought one from, I think, Boss or something like that. I've got it on my reverb returns for my music jams now. So I'm developing more of a familiarity, and then when I revisit the plugin that I did, it'll be a fairly clear thing. Like, if I do stuff, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I was supposed to be doing. But having not done it, there's nothing, I have no idea as to what this stuff is about. Anywho, let's see. So yeah, this is the Ides of being a audio DSP coder. It's a pity that it is so frustrating for people. And I grant I can be very frustrating, but I can try not to. Like, you'll notice I don't have any plugins that literally are called, this is my Akai SP1200 model. None of them are called that because I don't really know what that is. And even if I knew what that was, I would be disinclined to do that because I don't think it is right to try to do that thing. And my frustration is just that I don't know what that thing was nearly enough. Like, I got a whole range of crazy old sampler sounds in that little experimenting session. And I did the best that I could in that little experimenting session, and I would strongly advise, if somebody knows what they're after, load up that series of plugins in that order. Crunchy Grooveware will give you a sort of top-end heightening splash, which is like some of those Sakai samplers, because I have heard some of that stuff before. Derez might or might not even be a part of the equation. I had it in there, but I wouldn't assume that was just because that's what the sampler is doing doesn't mean that's what your plugins have to do in order to get you into the zone. Maybe you're going to completely leave out the derezzing or the frequency bashing part of it. Maybe it's all going to be about like crunchy grooveware and a filter after that to darken it back down again. Don't assume that you necessarily have to sample rate crush or bit crush the sound to get into the zone. I'm going to take a note, by the way. You can see me copying this. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to let me actually. Let me see whether I can copy it. Beastie Boys Sure Shot Drums. Okay. So next thing I'm going to do, because I've run over time-wise, but that's fine, because it was an interesting, frustrating battle of a challenge, and I did a couple of plugin debugging sessions, so I would consider all in all this was a good Monday. I have copied out your comment here, and I'm going to get offline and stop streaming and go and listen to that Beastie Boys track, which I have never heard. I don't know the Beastie Boys Sure Shot. I come from like prog rock stuff. I come from 1970s progressive rock. So I'm going to go and listen to that. And our friend, I hope he's still my friend, even if I can't do things to his liking, might or might not agree that that is the classic SB1200 sound, but I'm sure it's a SB1200 sound. So maybe that'll give me a bit more of an idea. And I'll go from there. But bear in mind, like what could possibly happen is if I can work out what's going on there, because when folks get into this kind of stuff, and they're like, no, you have to model the sampler, you have to model the preamplifier and stuff. That's not helpful to me because they're often wrong. It's not necessarily about, no, you have to model the distortion factor of that. There could be a whole bunch of other things going on that they're not clear of. But if I don't understand either, I can't go and do the actual thing that is getting there. And that's why I was pulling up 3 plugins to try to get into the zone. And I got into zones, yes. It apparently wasn't the correct one. But, I mean, thanks to Patreon, I've been doing this for a 3 years now. So I would say don't give up on me yet. I'm still here. I'm still here doing stuff. And we could have a Monday where assuming I get more of a sense of what's actually going on here, maybe there will be a Monday where I'm focusing on getting that into the zone. Honestly, I feel as if I might actually have to get a Nekai SB1200 at whatever cost, and if it's still possible to do, in order to really get a sense of what's going on there. Because I feel like the people who are really into that are working from a period where either they personally experienced working with these tools or all the stuff they listened to came off of that stuff. And that's simply not been my experience. So clearly I need more hands-on experience with some of this stuff. And then we'll see. I mean, I'm not done. I'm still putting out plugins on a regular basis, and we'll see where we go. On that note, I think Chad is descending into madness, so laters, folks. I will talk to you later. I'm going to go and lie down for a bit, man. It's a demanding workday, but a rewarding one nonetheless, and Bassamp will come out next week. And I'll be throwing the update for Clip Only out pretty soon. And I'm going to look into those biquad filters and figure out whether I want them to be inverse dry wet or what. Have them be consistent regardless. So on that note, talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.